Before the Civil War, your primary health care provider was a woman, sister, mother, daughter, and you were cared for in the home. But the Civil War opened up a big opportunity for women as paid health care providers. I'm Robert Hicks, Director of the Mutter Museum and Historical Medical Library of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. And welcome to another episode of Broken Bodies, Suffering Spirits, Injury, Death, and Healing in Civil War Philadelphia. The grave of Emily Bliss Suter. And this is very rare. Identifies her as a nurse during the Civil War, and she was at Gettysburg. In fact, a year after Gettysburg, she published her letters, and she wrote that the sights and sounds beggar description. Everywhere there are men with amputated arms and legs. The shrieks, the moans, the cries are awful to hear. It's worth mentioning that at the beginning of the Civil War, there really were no female nurses. I say female because nurses were usually other wounded soldiers who were conscripted to work in the hospitals before they could go back onto the battlefield. But it was during the Civil War that the institution of nursing, particularly female nursing, really took shape. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of convincing physicians in the field that a nursing corps could be helpful, efficient, and useful.
The numbers of casualties that we experienced was on a scale that had probably never been seen before in warfare. And beyond the treatment of the wounds and the surgeries that we were able to perform on the field and in areas removed from the field, there was a great need for care and support, the delivery of food and water and bandages and changes in bandages and the removal of waste. And we really had to rely on the kindness of strangers in a sense. Florence Nightingale had worked in the Crimea, but the development of nursing as a profession in the United States was still in its nascent stages.
What happened was that women would follow if their husbands or sons were hurt, many of them would go to the battlefields and then nurse them. Well, were they nurses? They were not counted as official nurses. Many of them were recruited by governors, certainly not the Army, to go to certain state regiments to take care of soldiers. Other women were Catholic sisters who usually didn't volunteer their own time because of the hierarchical authority of the church, so that either priests volunteered them or governors asked for their help. Other nurses worked for the Sanitary Commission. After a while, there was the U.S. Sanitary Commission, the Western Sanitary Commission, the Christian Sanitary Commission. All of these different commissions also began hiring nurses, and it was later on, thereafter, these organizations, these commissions, the state governments, many of them then were given the okay to recruit women. And then they would go to specific hospitals that were often that the states were running. African American women slaves worked. Contrabands in the North, freed slaves also worked. A lot of what was done in the Civil War in terms of nursing included bathing, cleaning, food, nutrition, cooking, bandaging, dressing wounds, assisting surgeons in operations. Yes, they wrapped bandages, but they also actually did dressing changes, and these were women. They also gave medicines. They did have some medicines that were given during the war, and the women were able to give some of those medicines.
There's no tolerance really for women in this male domain. So these women who come into these hospitals have to have really thick skin, and they have to be really stubborn and willing to deal with this. And those who stick it out really set a foundation for women to make the claim that they're able to and capable of, existing in this high-stress environment.
One sister was assisting with this particular surgery, and there was so much blood around that blood actually dripped on her white cornet, and she never said a word. She continued to assist with the surgery because it was so intense. And I think that other women had these same experiences. They did assist. And this is before we knew about the germ theory, so that people didn't gown and glove. Surgeons may have worn gowns, but it was the same one over and over again that they may have wiped their hands with and then used those same hands to dip into a wound. Many of the physicians at first preferred the men for nursing because this was what had always happened. Some physicians saw women as fussy busybodies, and that's a quote from one of the physicians in one of the books, and so they didn't have a lot of respect for these women coming in to this masculine military space and having these women invade it. Catholic sisters sometimes were preferred by physicians, and physicians have said the sisters didn't fuss with me, they obeyed. They did what I asked them to do.
I can recall in Gettysburg that the Sisters of Charity from Emmitsburg traveled from Emmitsburg up to Gettysburg at the time of the battle, traveled north across the Mason-Dixon line into the town and served with us in the care of soldiers of both armies without regard to their political affiliation, their rank or status, or the degree of their wounds. And their charitable work played an enormous role in helping our soldiers on both sides recover during that battle.
The Civil War is a revolution, really, in changing attitudes about women in healthcare, even though I think in the post-war era there's a lot of backlash, and there's a way in which Americans want to turn their back and forget how important women were in delivering medical care during the war.
My own feeling about nursing was that the best nurses were older, maternal-type women, because so many of these soldiers were boys, really, and many of them had come from rural areas, and a maternal woman in their presence seemed to do a world of good.